So I think we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome to today's program hosted by the Women's Hemispheric Network. I'm Maria Lourdes Gallo, Vice President of the America Society, Council of the Americas office in Miami. It is truly a pleasure to welcome back Dr. Susan Clancy, a good friend of our organization, who will be leading today's program on women's global leadership. How far have we really come in 20 years and where do we need to go? Dr. Clancy has a PhD in experimental psychology from Harvard University and is a professor at INCAE, where she teaches specialized courses in leadership, gender diversity, team processes, ethics, anti-corruption, and influence techniques. She's also the research director of INCAE's Center for Women's Leadership and advises corporations such as Coca-Cola, HSBC, General Mills, Procter & Gamble, HP, Cargill, and Walmart, amongst others. So she's very busy. More importantly, as we were discussing earlier with her, she is one of the most engaging and knowledgeable experts on women's issues. So I encourage our audience today to take advantage of this special time we have with her this afternoon. We will begin with Susan's presentation, and then we will open the floor to questions and answers from the audience. You can ask questions by sending a private message to Ariana Molina. You will see her name at the top of the chat box. She will include you in the queue, so then we can call you for questions. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. We also ask that you all keep your lines on mute to minimize background noise. We are thrilled, Susan, to have you back. Thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you for that lovely introduction, and it is a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited to have this opportunity. I thank the Council of the Americas and their initiative on the Women's Hemispheric Network for allowing this to happen during these difficult times. And I thank you so much all for attending. This is a really exciting opportunity for me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my presentation and we're going to get started because we are today on a tight schedule. I have 25 minutes. They're giving me 25 minutes to go over quite a bit. But I think we're all going to learn something, and I very much look forward to your questions when we're done. Okay, so the objective of today's presentation is I want to briefly review women's global progress in leadership. Specifically, what I mean by that is how are we doing globally in our rise to leadership? And then I'm going to, in very broad strokes, go over what the barriers are that we're facing, and in very broad strokes, go over what I perceive, well, it's not me, but what researchers, academics, experts in diversity perceive to be the opportunities. We're going to start with the data. I love the data. This is Global Gender Gap Report. This is just an amazing resource because what it's doing is it's benchmarking 135 countries on their progress towards gender parity. So you can see how every country in the world almost is doing in terms of this. What they're looking at is the proportion of men to women's progress on 4 different dimensions. And the 4 dimensions that they're looking at is, one of them is economic participation, one is educational attainment, one is political empowerment, and then there's health and survival. And your country gets a rank. A 1 means there is total equality. So if we were talking about education, for example, a 1 would mean for every boy that's educated, there's a girl. A 0 is total inequality. That would mean for every boy that's educated, there are no girls educated. So it's the proportion of men to women's progress on each of these dimensions. And I wanted to start out with the economic participation and opportunity, looking at Latin America and North America. And what I just want to quickly say is if we start from the bottom up, so let's look at wage equality, what we see is it's below a 1. That means inequality. In Latin America, it's more severe than the States, but in the States, this is inequality. Basically, men are making about 30% more for similar work. Estimated earned income, gender gap. Men are making more money over the course of their lifetime, about 13% more, and more significant in Latin America. And if we look at the top, this is sort of like a rough proxy of rising to positions of senior officials, managers, legislators. What we see is gender inequality. Now, if we transfer this onto the private sector, let's just look at globally. This is hot off the press. This is McKinsey data about 6 months ago. Female representation on executive committees. Just look at the number, 8% in Latin America. Norway, not bad. Norway, consistently a top performer, is only 15%. US, 14%. China, 9%. These are low numbers. And then if we look at female representation on boards, the numbers are, again, extraordinarily low. Latin America, 5%. US, only 15%. Now, you may be looking at Norway and thinking, wow, that's pretty good. The reason why Norway has 35% representation is because it's a law. So it's legislation that requires companies to have 35% representation. That's why they've achieved it. But everywhere else in the world, it's low. This is hot off the press from Deloitte and Touche. 16.9% of board seats held by women. If we compare it to 2 years ago, this is like, not a marginal improvement. So, we're not getting there. Now, people will say, oh, but we've got female CEOs. And in fact, Fortune ran this whole story about how the largest number of female CEOs, ever. And this is such great news. And it's true. In 2020, we have more female CEOs than we had in 1998. But I want you to understand, this is a record high of 7%. So fine, are we going to get all excited about this? That we have 7% representation? And now just to orient you to why this is important, basically the organizations that are making the products and the services and the laws and the policies that apply to us and our families, those organizations are run almost totally by men. Now, people will say, is our lack of representation at the top a function of not being in the pipeline? Maybe we're not educated, or maybe we're not employed like men. So to address that issue, I just want to show that in terms of educational attainment, there is a gender gap, but the gender gap is in favor of women by far. What you see is equality in terms of literacy, education in primary school and high school. And when you get up to college and graduate school, there are far more women than men. This is complete inequality in favor of women. So in the United States and in Latin America, there are more women today graduating with college degrees and graduate degrees than men. This doesn't mean they're in STEM fields. They're not. But if you're looking for a college degree, you're more likely to find it in a woman. And in terms of workforce participation, as you can see on the right side, what we've seen is a slow and steady increase in women's ascension into the formal workplace. And what we've seen is that males are sort of on a slow, they're either stagnant or on a decline. This is happening globally. What is anticipated is within 20 years, we're going to have gender equality in terms of workforce participation. So we are in the pipeline. So we're definitely in the leadership pipeline. The problem is this pipeline has leaks and clogs and needs a plumber. And I think this graph from McKinsey's most recent Women in the Workforce study, I think this sums up exactly what's happening. And it's happening probably to all of you out there in the organizations that you work for. What we're seeing is that at entry level, there's no problem. We're there. Gender diversity exists at entry level. But the problem is, as you move up the organization towards the top, heading to the C-suite, what academics call vertical segregation exists, and we start dropping out or we start stagnating. And when you get to the top, it's almost all men. To go back to that 35% number, if we're really looking for gender equality and we're looking for women not to be treated like a minority group and we're looking for bias and discrimination to end, we really do need 35% representation. And we're not yet close to it. This is, by the way, what's happening in Latin America. This is a multinational that I've been working with. And it's, as you can see, it's the same thing. So this point I want to stress is if you're working for an organization and your bosses are saying, oh, we don't have a gender diversity problem, half of our employees are women, you have to know that that doesn't matter. The problem is not getting women into organizations. The problem is once we get in there, we don't rise in the same way like men. And then people say to me, or my MBA students, well, what about the best trained? What about the women graduating from top business schools? Harvard, University of Chicago, Northwestern, INCAE in Latin America. How are we doing? Aren't we making it to the top? And the sad answer, and truthfully, this is depressing, is that even the best trained are not making it. This is wage gap after graduation from Harvard Business School and University of Chicago. And what you see is at graduate, now these are students that are equally smart, they're equally capable, and they're equally ambitious. And they, right from the start, they're making slightly less. But then what you see is over those 10 years, the change is more and more dramatic, and then something disturbing happens at 10 years. At 10 years, you see men taking off, and at 10 years, you see women stagnating and moving down. What about our political empowerment? Are we doing better in the public sector? So when I teach in Latin America, people say to me all the time, oh, we don't have a women's leadership problem because we have female presidents in Latin America. And it's true, we have had female presidents in Latin America. We have not in the United States. But what I want to say is, if you look at the gender gap data on political empowerment, and remember, now this is measuring the proportion of women to men in terms of ministerial, parliamentary positions, and number of years as head of state. And what you see is, if you're going to look at political empowerment, let's look at the last column. So the last column, light blue, and what you see is the gender gap is 0.24. Now remember, 1 is gender equality, 0 is none. Okay, this is almost 75, no, more than 75% men likely to be in positions of political empowerment than women. And this is almost all over the world. If you want to see it depicted in another way, we can look at it like this. This one's a few years old, but the change hasn't been that great. So what I want you to know is the dimension we're performing worst is political empowerment. The world is still, the public sector, being run and dominated by men. So the takeaway, we are far from gender equality in leadership. This is what I hear all the time. But this is okay. We're a new generation. Things are going to change. And I know I'm getting old because I've been hearing it for 20 years. And for 20 years, people have been talking about how they're different and they're open-minded and they don't have biases, et cetera. And all I want to say to that is this. Right there. So let's start with the bottom line. The bottom line is political empowerment. This is 2006 to 2019. Let me ask you, what's changed? I don't know. There's been a slight change, but not much. And now let's move up one more line, okay? Move up one, and now we're looking at economic participation and opportunity. And what are we seeing? We're seeing almost no change, a tiny bit better than 2006 maybe, but worse than we were doing in 2013 or 14. So I am showing this not to be depressing. I'm not showing this to, like, you know, I don't know, ruin our motivation or whatever. I'm showing this because we need to know, either for ourselves or for our daughters. We are not seeing a change in women's empowerment like we should be, given our movement into education and the formal workforce. And according to the World Economic Forum, this will not reach equality. If we do nothing, this will not reach equality for 100 years. So if you're looking for a time in history when women and men are equal at the rate we're going, it will be 100 years from now. So let's go over now quickly what the barriers are, because I know this is what people, you know, are most interested in. You know, what the heck is going on? And I'm not saying anything new, you know, and I think I'm saying stuff you already know, and I know that you've already had some great talks on these topics. So I'm doing this broad strokes, but one of the big barriers, let's start with work-life balance. Work-life balance. What are the characteristics of top leadership jobs today? Long hours, central office as a location, meaning you're expected to get into a car, drive to a central office. Average commute is usually about 45 minutes to an hour, back and forth, and you're supposed to stay there for long hours. And on top of it, characteristics of high-profile jobs is constant travel. You need to visit clients, you need to manage your sales teams, you need to travel, okay? So given that, consider this. Women everywhere in the world do more unpaid work than men do. And what am I talking about when I say unpaid work? What I'm talking about is raising the kids and taking care of your house. That's most, I mean, but you know, there's all kinds of the grocery shopping, caring for non-family members, volunteer work. We do the majority of unpaid work all over the world. Now, McKinsey Global Institute is really trying to do something about this, because if we were in the workforce more, we would be adding more to global growth. But I'm bringing it up to just show you that it doesn't matter what country you live in. When you ask who's doing most of the unpaid work involving family and kids and relatives, it's women. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just telling you that that's what the data shows. Now, how many hours are in a day? You know, there are 24 hours in a day. And if women are doing most of the work involving family and home, who has more time to devote to their careers? The answer is definitely men. And I think this very much explains what's happening to even the top trained MBAs. What happens 10 years after they graduate? They're on average about 36. If they have kids and a family, that's when they're in the midst of it. Who has more time to devote to their careers? It's the men. In interviews, I have a friend who's doing research and writing a book on female CEOs. Even the women at the top are saying they don't get much help at home, and they are still doing most of the work or managing most of the work at the top. A CEO that's a man is about 95% likely to have a wife full-time that's taking care of everything involving house and family. If you're a CEO and a woman, you don't have that. This is why this article, Maria Slaughter's article on The Atlantic, Why Women Still Can't Have It All, it hit home with so many people. Because what she said is, if you as a woman want to make it today to the top, there's only 3 ways to do it. 1, you have to be a superhuman. Sheryl Sandberg may be a superhuman. She could be I'm not. The other way you can do it is be rich. If you're really rich, you can afford all the backup help in the world. I'm not rich. Or you're self-employed. So superhuman, rich, or self-employed, you can have an easier chance of making it to the top. Most of us are none of those 3 things. So work-life balance is an issue. What's an issue? Gender bias is an issue. Now, gender bias, what I want to say is, because of gender bias, as you probably already know, both genders have an unconscious preference for male leaders. Both genders. Now, you could say, oh, that's not me. I prefer women. I'm super pro-women. I have kids that are women. I support women. I just want you to read this. A boy and his father are involved in a car accident. The father is killed, but the boy is taken to the hospital into surgery. Upon seeing him, the surgeon says, I can't operate on the boy because he's my son. What gender did you originally imagine the surgeon as? I'm going to tell you, data shows that most people immediately imagine the surgeon as a man. And I can tell you, I have students in my classroom and in the companies that I work for who read this and will say to me, I don't understand. Is it a ghost? One guy says, I know what it is. It's a gay couple. They're both homosexuals. Another student will say, I know it's a priest. So it is easier for people to imagine the surgeon as a ghost priest or somebody gay than it is that it's a woman. The majority of you are picture it as a woman, and it's not because of any conscious intent to evaluate or women differently. It's because we have been conditioned to associate certain roles with men. This is part of learning. Ivan Pavlov and John Watson studied it. You pair 2 things together over time, like men and leadership, and our brains just associate the 2, and it gets stuck in there. And we've got something in our heads that when we think leadership, we think men. If you want to explore this more, you can take the implicit association test at Harvard. It's super fun. It'll probably show you more about your bias than you want to know, but I think it's useful to know. But what I want to say is gender bias exists, and it's in women, and it's in men, and it's unconscious. And because of gender bias, women are evaluated differently than men. They are treated differently than men. They have to work harder to be seen as equal. They get listened to less. And there's a double bind. This is the double bind, is that all of us, women and men, like assertive leaders that can make tough decisions. We like that. But what do we not like? We don't like assertive women. Assertive women turn us off. It's just something, I mean, I'm not going to use the B word because it's Council of the Americas, but so it's a double blind. And I could go on and on and on because there is so much solid science on the dangerous impact of gender bias on our progression into the workforce. And this is unconscious gender bias. We're not doing it on purpose. It's happening beyond our level of awareness. Gender bias is holding us back, and the last thing holding us back, main one, is our own choices. What do we as women choose? Lower paid careers and jobs. We do. We choose it. We choose to be less likely than men to ask for raises and promotions. Tons of research on this. We choose, supposedly, to opt out of full-time work. We choose to spend more time on family and home, and we choose to care less than men about getting formal power. It just, as women, it shows overall we're less interested in formal power structures and getting to the top. Now, because of this, Sheryl Sandberg wrote her famous book, Lean In. And what is Sheryl Sandberg's advice? Oh, you need to be different. You need to lean in, sit at the table, be more assertive, don't opt out before you have to, et cetera, et cetera. And this approach is a mistake. And it's agreed on by anybody who's an expert in this area. It's a mistake because it's putting the onus of responsibility onto the women. It is not our fault. What we have to start thinking about is what's wrong with the systems and processes that we are working in that are holding us back. And even Michelle Obama endorses that. This was her explosive statement. What was it? Michelle Obama says, lean in, sometimes that blank doesn't work. It's not working because it is time to stop asking women to change. It is time to stop saying, be this, be more time conscious, have more emotional intelligence, be more assertive. Forget it. We don't need to change. We're awesome. What needs to change is the firms and societies we exist in. We are 50% of the talent and 50% of the consumers in this new century. And firms and organizations need us. And it's time for them to do some heavy lifting. So what are the opportunities? And I'm going to just conclude with the 3 levels where there are opportunities. There are opportunities at the firm level, there are opportunities at the government level, and there are opportunities at the individual level. Now, again, this is very broad strokes, so I'm not including everything. I'm including the main things. At the firm level, there's good news. This is recent McKinsey data, okay, 2019. Most people in the private sector will agree that gender diversity is a top priority. This is good news. It kind of bothers me that it's not 100%, but I'll take it, okay? So I can confidently say, compared to 2015, most men and women believe gender diversity is a top priority. Okay, so what can they do? This is what they can do that will work. What they can do is implement objective performance evaluations. This is not easy to do, but this is about designing a bias-free organization. It is great to have gender bias talks and raise awareness and training, and people love it, but it doesn't matter if you've been trained because the bias is already in there. And it's affecting how you're evaluating people and who you choose to gravitate towards and who you listen to in ways that you can't control. So the only way to override bias is to make sure whatever assessment mechanisms you have, from interviewing, recruiting, promoting, have to be based on things that you can see, data, not on things like, do I think that this will be a good leader? This is the most critical thing an organization can do. Number 2, you have to set diversity targets. And what should the target be? It should be 35%. Forget 50, you're not going to get it. Forget less than 35% because it may not make a difference. 35%. And when you set those targets, you have to have the managers held accountable. If performance evaluation and compensation is not tied in to managers hitting these targets, it's not going to happen. The next thing a firm can do is opportunity for flexible work schedules, telecommuting, kind of what we're doing right now. This is huge, and this is the only reason I think COVID has been beneficial, because what COVID has shown us, this is recent Gallo data, is that we are increasingly moving to do work online. We're working remotely. And before there was this assumption that, oh, you have to be with a client face to face, or you need to get on a plane and give the talk in person, and you need to be in the central office. And because of COVID, we're not able to do that. And people are realizing that this is beneficial. And when you ask people, when the closures are lifted, do you want to go back to work as it is, or would you like to continue working remotely as much as possible? What you see is most people saying, I want to keep working remotely. So this is going to be very good for giving women and men the kind of flexibility that they need. It's not necessarily we want to work less. We just need more control over when and where we work. And finally, parental leave policies. So firms have to start offering equal opportunities to either men or women. Right now, many firms, especially in Latin America, only offer maternity leave. And as a consequence, that is very, as I'm going to go over that again with government ideas, but this is a real problem for women, because as long as we're more expensive when we have kids, we are going to be discriminated against because companies don't want to hire an employee that's going to be more expensive. So these are the big four. And if you're part of a firm, an organization, I bet they want to do, let's start a women's network, or let's start a women's leadership day, or let's get a special women's diversity officer. All of that stuff's fine. But if you're not doing these things, it's not going to change. Opportunities at a government level, change maternity leave laws to parental leave laws everywhere. Right now, gender discrimination is encoded into the law in many of the countries that we're from. Why? Because it's not parental leave. Men don't have the option of taking care of the kids. It's only women. So what that makes is companies discriminate against women. Right now in Latin America, they do pregnancy tests. I've been on legal cases when they're doing pregnancy tests and hiding it. Women are getting asked, are you going to have babies? When are you going to have babies during interviews? As long as it's only the mother who takes care of that kid, then you are going to have women not getting hired or promoted the same way as men. On top of it, you're contributing to the cycle of bias. The cycle of bias that says it's supposed to be the woman at home doing everything and it's supposed to be the man working. So that's the first thing. The second thing is affordable childcare. Now, in Latin America, we kind of have this, but I feel bad for you people in the United States. From the time a baby is born till when they start school, kindergarten, there's many years there. And during that year, somebody has to be taking care of your child during the day. And you need a nanny, which is super expensive, or you need to send them to daycare, which is super expensive. And I know many women, incredibly talented, incredibly smart, who dropped out. Why? Because the cost of childcare for their 2 or 3 kids was more than they were making at their work. So unless the government is doing something to promote affordable childcare, we are going to see talent leaving the market because there's no other way to deal with the taking care of your kids. And the third thing is quotas for women, starting with public boards of publicly traded companies. I know it's controversial. 10 years ago, I would have said, no, don't have quotas. You know, I would have been thinking like women think, oh, I wouldn't want to be there because somebody thought I was just a number and they wouldn't think I was really talented. And I only got there because, you know, of this quota. I don't care anymore. Because you know what? Men on boards who are not capable aren't asking themselves, am I capable? They're just assuming they are. So why are we so worried? Obviously, if you get invited to be on a board, it's because you have some potential. And right now, there are so many women with potential that are getting overlooked in favor of men who are less competent. So I think it's time to start with the quotas. And we're not asking for 50% representation. We're asking for 35% representation. That would be a third thing that we could do. And then finally, there's the individual level. And this is what we're doing right here. It's about empowerment. And what's the best form of empowerment? It's knowledge. It's learning what you can about the topic and what's important and what you can do. And then with that, pushing for change. So what it has to be, it's a push. And remember, if we don't keep pushing, nothing's going to change for 100 years. And in that push for change, I cannot emphasize this enough, is that we need to get leaders involved. One of the biggest findings is that nothing changes unless the change is coming from the top. And if we don't have top leaders who see this as an issue and are committed to doing something about it, then it is unlikely we're going to make any progress in the near future. Now, unfortunately, most of the top leaders, I shouldn't say unfortunately. Okay, the truth is, obviously, most of the top leaders today are men. So what I'm trying to say is as we move forward, we need to get the men involved. Women's networks are so important. We need our safe place. We need to be able to discuss with each other and share. But we also need to be networking and interacting and fighting for this with men involved side by side, because that's how we're going to make change in the future. So with that, I want to say thank you. It was a pleasure. I hope I didn't go too far over 25 minutes. And I am very happy to answer any question at all that you have.
I think we could listen to you all day.
I would
So
like
many
that.
So we do have quite a few questions. So the first one, Melida Serrano, you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Hello, Susan. Hi, everybody. Yes, on your first slide, you were talking
Oh,
about.
wait, Melida, tell us where you're from, what company and what country you're from. That's the nice thing about virtual. We don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, true. I'm from Nicaragua, and right now I'm working on my own company. I'm just building it up, and I'm very glad to get to know about this initiative, and I think it's very important in all the world, especially in Latin America, where we have a big, huge gender gap.
Yeah.
And I was looking at one of the first slides where Susan was talking about about Norway, where the government has set up some laws to establish gender equality. Is this something feasible, or are you doing something to talk to the governments to help into making these laws? Because it seems it's helping a bit, at least in Norway.
It is.
So it would be.
It's important. Like this is, I have been sort of lobbying for this in Latin America. And before COVID sort of shut everything down, there were some law firms in Panama that had a number of women that had attended some of INCAE seminars who were saying, we need to start talking about this. We need to start lobbying for this in Latin America. But as far as I know, this isn't my particular area of expertise. I only know what the research says. But it's important. But you know what, Melida, can I show you something depressing? I don't even know if I should show this, but you know what?
Go ahead.
I don't know. All right, I got to do it. Okay, fine. Remember, knowledge is empowerment. Okay, so I've obviously been super interested in what these Nordic countries are doing. I'll watch this. Can you see this? Let's see. Am I still sharing my presentation?
Yes.
Yeah, we see it. I think you just.
Okay, here we go. No, it wasn't Norway. It was Denmark. Okay, check this out. All right, so this is, well, you know what? This is related to childcare stuff. Remember, I'm pushing the importance of promoting paternal leave rather than maternal leave. Now, this is definitely going to help, but it's not a magic bullet, because what we're seeing is that even in Denmark, which has one of the best parental leave policies, what we're seeing is women's earnings drop after the birth of their first child. And this is because even though fathers could take up to 32 weeks of leave, the average father only leaves for 30 days, while the average mother leaves for nearly 300 days. So what's interesting about this, Melida, to go back to what you were talking about, is that these Nordic countries are able to get women into board positions because of quotas, but it's not translating into getting women into positions of private sector leadership.
Okay, so if that's also another point. I mean, if we don't have, if women are not in leadership positions that can actually make these changes happen, but also to get there, you have a road to move. And it all begins from home, from how I can see it with how my mom used to treat my brother, for example. He was the boy and he had to, he was going to wash the dishes and stuff. This changed in time.
Right.
He cooks and now he does his own stuff. But it's happening in lower income families. It's happening in a lot of Latin American countries. I talk about the Latin America because that's where I am. And it's not going to change unless we do something that will provide this education to these women in these low-income sectors, so that they will get the education, the knowledge, that they also have the rights, they also have the same benefits as like men.
Okay, I was just talking with Maria at the start of this talk. The missing group that needs this information and needs knowledge about what's happening with leadership is girls. I'd say as early as middle school, if not earlier. And I truly believe this has to be incorporated into the educational system, because we are graduating every day talented women who still think that all the opportunities exist and they have equal opportunities, and they're not aware that they're being treated differently, and they're not aware of the barriers. You know, it's fascinating. It would be like, imagine you're training a doctor and you tell doctors how to help people, but you don't talk about cancer, because you're like, oh, cancer is a dirty secret. Let's just hide that from them. Obviously, when they get out in the real world, they're going to run into cancer. This is an opportunity, I think, to start thinking about how we start developing educational or training programs, or even opportunities like this, networks for girls, so that they could get this information.
Absolutely. So, Laura Quevedo.
Yes, hi. Hi, everyone. So thank you, and great session, Susan. Also, thank you so much, first of all. So I'm from Diageo, and I wanted to ask you if you see more challenges in gender diversity at leadership levels in private companies in Latin America versus others like Europe or other continents, and if so, why?
Okay. So what I know, and I can't give away any names of the companies because it's confidential, but what I can tell you is that it is harder. What I can tell you about Latin America for sure is that no companies in the private sector have been able to get their desired levels of gender diversity. But it's the, what's it called? The corporate offices that are pushing it. And the corporate offices are pushing it in Latin America because Latin America's rates are much lower than the United States and Europe. So it's definitely more challenging in Latin America. Now, that doesn't mean it's easy in the States or Europe. We're not getting the numbers there, but it is harder in Latin America. And Latin America, I have data that shows, is behind in kind of caring about this as an issue. And I'm not blaming men. I mean, this is women and men who are saying, oh, I don't really think this is a big issue. So the short answer to your question is, it is much more challenging in Latin America, although it's challenging everywhere.
So it's challenging. Great. Thank you. Yes, I find that I head the Latin American and Caribbean HR area, and I find it challenging. So obviously for us, it's super critical, super important. We're actually in 36%, but and we want to go for more. But each time I'm searching externally, it's very difficult to find talent also at leadership levels, diverse talent. Now, obviously, we look for diverse pools.
Right.
And therefore, my question. Okay, thank you.
And it is because this talent, it's not that it's not there, it's that it's dropping out. So when you're looking for it at the high levels, you lost it in the middle levels. You know, so you get it in the door and then it just stagnates or falls out in the middle. And when you're looking for it at the top, it's super difficult. So yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Great to see you. Irais Perez Duran.
Hello.
You want to unmute yourself?
Yeah,
there we go.
Hello, sorry.
Hello.
I was on mute, sorry.
That happens to me all the time. My team has to tell me, Maria, get on mute.
Well, I was actually, it has to do with what you explained about Norway and the Scandinavian countries. But I was wondering, there has been several discussions about increasing gender diversity and actually opposed opinions about how to achieve that. So in your opinion, would settling a quote for women in certain positions will gradually lead the world towards choosing the right persons in those senior positions, regardless the gender?
Yeah. Okay.
Or
So,
is it something else that needs to be done in parallel?
oh, I don't, so are you saying, would that be the magic button? So if God came down and just said 35% of all leadership positions have to be women, would that solve all the problems? Is that what you're asking?
I mean, if it gradually will help.
It will help. It will gradually help. And the proof of the pudding is there. Oh, I cannot believe Esther Duflo from MIT. She's an academic. She's written a bunch of books on this topic. She does actual scientific research on these type of issues. And she looked at the impact of quotas in India on perceptions of women leadership and on future female empowerment. And what she found is that when quotas were put into, I can't remember what level of leadership, it was some form of town, like equivalent to a mayor. When they put quotas in and women had to get into those positions, or 50% women, everyone complained at the start. Oh, we don't like this. This is uncomfortable. This woman isn't qualified. But then within 10 years, attitudes towards what gender should be in leadership had changed, and you saw an increase in the number of women in leadership. Now, I don't want to quote the numbers because I might have it wrong, but her name is Esther Duflo, and she is at MIT. Okay. She would say, yes, if you put in the quotas, you're going to rock the boat at the start. Okay, people are going to make noise, blah, 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 but over the long term, it's going to have a positive impact. And wait, can I answer the question one more way? What I want to say too is gender bias exists because we've paired leadership with men. Okay, that's in our head. If we had a world in which we saw 35% of leadership as women, what happens is you start untangling that automatic classical conditioning. So by having women in leadership, you are indirectly changing people's ideas about what's appropriate, and then that's reducing gender bias, which then is just easier for everybody. So quotas, I would have to say there are problems and benefits, but if I really had to be honest at this point in my life, I'm coming out in favor of quotas.
Okay.
Susan, and I think I saw something that in France they created some kind of index where they created quotas for companies and they were ranking, and then the companies started to actually compete against each other and would look at that. So it became, I want to be at the top of that list. Yeah.
Competition. All right. I love that.
I would say
I'm gonna look for that. Okay.
So we have an anonymous question. It says, I was wondering what we can do to break unconscious biases.
There's only two things. Well, I mean, I don't know what level we're talking about, at an individual level or an organizational level. If we want to break the impact of unconscious bias at an organizational level, we have to have objective performance evaluations. So one of the reasons I love being an academic is because it's still not perfect, but I get evaluated on number of publications, number of books, and teaching evaluations. So these are things that you can see. So when you're looking at what faculty should be promoted, you're looking at number of publications, considering the rank of the journals, number of books, and teaching evaluations. So you can see what you're evaluated on. So then I could complain, you're paying me less, which they probably are because I'm a woman, but you could say, look, here is my qualification. So, that's nice. Professional orchestras, when you're a musician and you audition behind a screen. And the reason why you audition behind a screen with no shoes on, so they can't hear your click, click, click of your tacones, is because that's unbiased. You're just hearing the music. You're not seeing the person. So from an organizational level, the way we got to get rid of it is to work on making those metrics by which we hire people and evaluate them and promote them unbiased. At an individual level, the best you can do, I'm telling you, the best you can do is know it exists and understand that it's influencing your behavior. I'm sorry, I don't have anything more exciting to say on that topic. But the last thing that could happen that would get rid of biases is what I said earlier. If suddenly all over the world, 35% of women were in leadership, you would start seeing those biases end. Because now leadership is associated with women and not just men, and that would kill the bias very quickly. So I would say what we really need is to be seeing more women leaders. And whatever ones there are, we should be promoting them more and making them more visible so everybody sees them. You need to be aware that you have biases and that they're impacting your behavior, and you need to be looking at organizations for as objective performance evaluation as you can get.
Okay, so I'm going to start going quickly because we have questions. We could be here till happy hour almost.
I'll stay. I
That's what we need to do next time.
I have some wine. I'm happy to stay.
We know what the theme will be of the next one with you, though. Rebecca Garcia. Rebecca?
Yes, hello. Yes, thank you so much, Susan.
And Rebecca, where are you from? I'd love to hear where you're from.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I'm a senior associate at INCAE in the Mexico City office.
Oh,
okay, welcome.
Wow.
Thank
okay,
you.
Congratulations.
Thank you so much. So my question for Susan is, it seems that for women to be very successful or to not, I mean, to achieve the position that they want, for example, in my case, being a partner, we have to have a partner in our family, I mean, a spouse that supports us. Actually, I'm very lucky because I have one of those. He's a partner in another firm, and he understands that women have to arrive. So I count on him. But I've seen a lot of friends that do not count on this help, and they haven't developed a network that supports for them to be at work, for long hours, like you say, etc. So in the data you have you seen other options besides having a partner that supports you, or a network like having nannies or daycares or something, and another thing that will help women to arrive?
Oh, so wait, stay with me. You're fascinating.
Yes.
Okay, so you just know that this woman is in one of the toughest fields for women to make partner, and that's because in law you are, if I understand correctly, maybe things have changed, but your partnership will be based a lot on how many hours you bill.
Right.
Correct?
Yes. Totally
Okay.
right. Yes.
So do you understand that she's in a problem right now? So her whole field is not about her client relationships. It's not about whether her clients like her. It's not about whether she wins her cases, or I don't know what type of law you're in. It's how many hours she bills, which
Right.
means it is like rats in a cage. And I'm sorry, I shouldn't compare you to you gotta work your butt off. It's very hard for women. So what you're asking me that I find interesting is, what can women themselves do to cope? I think you've answered some big ones, but I would like to think about it more. Instead of what women can do to cope, I think it would be more about what law firms need to do in order to better allow 50% of their potential talent to be able to work there. Because what the data is showing is that women are dropping out before partnership, or women are not making partnerships and are leaving. So what I would love, and I'm not in that field, but I know from the States, there's some movement to sort of change this idea about billable hours. Like, as women, if we continue to just figure out how to make it, you know what I mean? Like, how do I make it? 2 glasses of red wine a night, anti-anxiety, 3 different nannies, my mother on the phone only once a week, no contact with my suegra. Like, you can set up all of the things that will help you get through. But the truth is, you shouldn't have to. It's a system that was built for men in a time that's very different. And this talk wasn't about the business case. But there is so much compelling evidence that to remain competitive in the future, law firms, like every other firm, is going to need to do a better job of recruiting and maintaining their female talent, because talent is getting harder and harder to find. So,
right, Susan, and sorry for interrupting, but because you said that you recommend to have objective evaluations, and how, I mean, this doesn't make sense with the thoughts that to have or special treatment to women, or like, you know what I mean? They because of these objective goals.
no, this is not, you know, it turns out everybody wants objective goals. And by the way, none of this should be about special treatment for women. You know, this wasn't a charla on the business case, but I have to be clear that there is a really powerful, compelling need for firms in this particular time in history to be able to retain and keep their female talent, because there's not enough talent going around. And the survey data already shows that people are freaking out, and there are less babies being born, and the population is aging. So firms are changing. I mean, they're already beginning to do many of these things in order to incorporate women. Not because they're fair or just, but because it's about competitiveness. And your firm law is behind, I think, a little bit, and you're in Mexico, which according to Gender Gap data is not very gender diversity friendly, even compared to other countries. So you have it tough. But I guess what I'm saying is, as long as your performance evaluation is billable hours, no woman is going to be able to have equal opportunity. That is the truth. And I know that billable hours is not the best way of measuring. My brother was a lawyer with Skadden Arps. He was a partner. He actually retired when he was 55. Youngest partner in Skadden Arps history. And my brother has very big issues with billable hours as the measure of law. He thinks things like the quality of your client relationships, how long you've had them, how much money you bring in, et cetera, should be critical.
Okay, so we're going to try to we have about 5, 6, 7, maybe we can go over a little, but we want to get a few more questions in. Horace, you're someplace there. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hello.
Are you still out there?
Hello.
There you are. I hear you.
Okay,
nice to hear you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a great presentation, and
God, it's a guy. How many?
Yes,
wait.
Yes.
It's a guy. Okay, wait, Maria. How many guys are here?
We need more gender parity in the audience.
I know.
So that's one thing
we
have to work on.
Okay.
Sorry,
Horace, thank you. I already like you a lot, Horace. Okay.
No, thank you, and really, this is something that I'm really, very interested, because I had a very good school. I used to work for a company called Schlumberger in the oilfield services, and they had very high percentages of field engineers, and also leadership positions, with great female professionals. And it was not because of a quota. It was because really the company believed and understood and saw the value of having, a diverse workforce. And so that was my comment to Ariana, that I think it really has to start, from the very top of the organization, believing that why it is valuable, the understanding, what this brings to the organization and to the customers. But also, I think that what companies need to do to have the right culture, have it embedded in the culture, in the mindset, the companies also need to do things about it, and not just have great percentages or billboards. They really need to accommodate and think that, wow, it's amazing that we have a bright woman that is also has the blessing to have a baby. So, okay, so if this is happening, let's do something for this woman to enjoy having the baby, but also let's be flexible and accommodate, her life, so she doesn't have to be concerned. It's like, oh my God, I have to be on maternity leave for I don't know how long, and the work is piling up, and they're calling me, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think I think it's not just about, the education, all those things that of course are extremely important, but I think that companies really need to do a little bit more and basically say, you know what, now like with the pandemic, it's like, well, you know what, you're a woman, you have to take care of your kids in the morning because they have to attend online learning, and they cannot make it to a call. Fine, that's no problem, but you don't have to stay until 8 o'clock in the night because you were, educating your kids, you were helping them at getting education. So that there shouldn't be a punishment on top of that. So there are a lot of things that I believe need to change in companies to really make diversity a true thing.
I mean, amen. Everything you're saying is true. And the problem is there are very few companies that have that mentality. So absolutely, this is exactly what we need. Companies run by leaders who understand why this is critically important. And there are some out there. There are some. The problem is most aren't. Most people do not understand why this is critical for competitiveness. So speaking of that, that is a very interesting talk. We call it the business case, but that could be a trial. Why is this necessary for competitive? Most leaders don't understand. They can't see the link between having women and making money and remaining competitive. And that's a problem. Yeah. And if you do have a leader who understands that, then you have a company in which they're starting to make changes. And your point about childbirth is well taken. Think about this. The talent force of the future is 50% women, and all of those women may have babies. So this means 50% of your talent is going to be having babies. Why are we still treating babies like it's a disease? Mm-hmm. It is a mentality that is outdated. It's dead. And there are leaders who are on the cutting edge who understand why this is important. But most of the firms we're seeing are slow to catch.
Susan, can we have 5 more minutes? Is that okay of your time? We can turn your air conditioning back on. Beatriz.
No,
Beatriz Cabrera. So we're going to take 2 more questions, but quickly. Beatriz.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hi, I'm Beatriz. I'm part of the Kellogg team in Latin America. I'm in Mexico. And my question is about cultural bias. Talking about particularly about machism, that we live here in Mexico, a lot of it. And machism is basically put it into the table by women. And there, when women get tougher with women than any other person, I think that there we have a big problem in there. How can we deal with that? How can we change that mindset in which women is tougher with other women than even men? I remember I'm a lawyer at my school, and I have my tests in their oral speaking and the evaluations. My toughest evaluation were when the teachers are women. So it was kind of difficult to deal, trying to do something, but at the same time, the ones that we want to grow up in our positions are the ones that are pushing up our down in this. No?
I know. Okay, so yes, and what you're talking about is the queen bee syndrome. That's where they got. So women, you would think women would support other women, and then they don't. But again, okay, so let's go back to gender bias. So gender bias is because we have, since we were babies, seen leadership paired with men. So all the presidents, all the people interviewed on news, all the history books, all the big movies, the leaders are men. And what do we see women doing? We mostly see women, with kids, home, and even when we're little, there's a pink aisle for toys and a blue aisle for girls. I mean, a pink for girls and blue for boys, and girls play with babies and boys play with race cars. And it's like in our heads from the time we're little, and that certain things are paired with women and certain things are paired with men. So it's not, gender bias exists in women and men because we have had this unconscious pairing since the time we were little. And when gender bias exists, we view women less favorably. We don't even know we're doing it. It's just we're more comfortable with the idea of men in leadership, and we're evaluating them more positively than women, and we don't know it. And women and men have that bias inside of them. So I think it's almost unfair that we put more pressure on women. So now we're saying, okay, women, you get the short end of the stick in everything, you know, and on top of it, you should be better than men about gender bias. I don't know. It's just hard.
Let me interrupt you a little bit, if it's possible.
Yeah.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Go ahead.
No,
There's
go ahead.
another question.
Yeah, but
Can we take one more?
The queen bee syndrome is because we expect women to be better than men. But the gender bias is in women too, because we all grew up in the same environment. So it's very hard. And I think we can't expect that women are going to 100% support other women, because it's very hard to override that unconscious bias. Does that make sense?
Okay, one last question.
Yes,
Carolina?
yes, thank you.
Carolina Costa. And that's it,
Hi,
that's the
how
last
are
one.
you? Good afternoon.
Hi.
Thank you very much for such an inspiring conversation today. I'm Carolina. I'm from Peru, and I work for Pfizer in a regional position. Actually, I mean, just listening to your talk, currently the best countries in the IT situation are run from women from 7 nations, as you know, Denmark, Germany, Taiwan, etc. I think this is a great example of how talented, committed, passionate, and disciplined we are. These are great examples of times we have gotten really gender equality right. What is the one thing I can do to make a positive gender equality in my organization?
Well, what is your job?
I'm in marketing.
So you're in marketing. Wow. And what exists right now in your firm to promote gender diversity?
Oh, I'm actually part of the diversity and inclusion team.
I'm going to say the one thing that your organization could do to promote gender diversity would be, number one, to make sure that the leaders in the firm and everybody understand why gender diversity is linked to competitiveness. So there has to be embedded in the culture an understanding that this is not about fairness and justice. This is about survival in the 21st century. And it is. And then the second thing would be working on ensuring that performance evaluations and hirings are being based on objective criteria, and that gender bias is not interfering with women's progress. And the third thing, I can't say it's one, but the third thing is to ensure that women are being allowed more flexibility in when and where they work, meaning telecommuting, like we're all doing in COVID, is an opportunity. Yeah. Because what's really causing women to drop out, I think the most, is that assumption that you got to be in an office from 8 to 8, and we just can't do it. So those would be the three big things. It's not just one.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Susan, thank you so much for coming back. It has been an amazing conversation. We have enough questions for another session, so we hope you'll accept our invitation to come back.
Yeah, I think we should do it again, and we can have it with wine in the evening.
I think so too.
As long as you want. All right. Thank everybody, anybody who's still out there. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
You.
And
thank you very much.
Yeah, and it was an honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. You're welcome back to our Women's Hemispheric Network anytime. And
I know, and I hope next time I can give you all a hug. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for
okay.
everyone who attended. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank